In a remote corner of the country, far from the noise of cities and the chatter of towns, lay a small village surrounded by tall, dark mountains. These mountains were ancient, their peaks sharp and cold, and their slopes covered with thick forests where sunlight barely reached the ground. The villagers had lived here for generations, learning to survive in the harsh environment. They knew which paths were safe, which herbs could heal, and which animals were dangerous. But despite their knowledge, there was one place in the mountains that no villager dared to approach, and one figure that filled their hearts with fear: the mountain man in the cage. The mountain man was a mystery to everyone. His home was not a normal house but a strange, cage-like structure perched high on the mountainside. It was made of wooden beams and iron bars, strong enough to withstand storms and wild animals, yet it seemed almost alive, as if it had grown from the mountain itself. Villagers said he had lived there for decades, long enough that no one could remember a time before he existed. Some claimed he was once a villager himself, who had chosen to retreat from the world. Others whispered that he was a man who had survived something terrible, and the mountains had become his prison and his fortress. Stories about the mountain man were told in hushed voices, especially when children were nearby. Mothers warned their children not to wander too far, and fathers reminded hunters to avoid the dangerous mountain paths. "Stay away from the cage," they would say, "or the mountain man will come for you." Even though no one could be sure what "come for you" meant, the villagers didn't take any chances. Animals would disappear mysteriously. Livestock would be found dead in the forest. And sometimes, at night, strange, low howls echoed through the valley. Everyone believed the mountain man was behind these events, though no one had ever seen him in action. Despite the fear, curiosity always lingered. Young boys and girls, daring and adventurous, would sneak up the mountain trails to catch a glimpse of the infamous cage. They would hide behind rocks and trees, peering through the gaps in the wooden bars. From afar, they could sometimes see a tall, broad figure moving inside, but the details were always blurry. His face was never clear, and his actions were always strange. Sometimes he would swing from the beams, other times he would sit completely still, staring into the distance as if talking to the mountains themselves. The villagers' fear was not just because of his appearance or strength, but also because of the unknown. They could not understand why he lived this way, why he chose isolation, and why he seemed so unpredictable. There were rumors that he could climb the cliffs faster than any goat, that he could vanish into the forest without leaving a trace, and that he had an almost supernatural ability to survive in conditions that would kill ordinary people. These stories grew taller with every telling, until the mountain man became a figure not just of mystery, but of legend, a living shadow in the mountains that no one wanted to challenge. People who had accidentally crossed paths with him rarely spoke of it for long. A hunter who once tried to track a deer near the cage came back pale and trembling, refusing to go into the mountains again. He claimed the mountain man had appeared suddenly, standing on a rock above him, watching silently. The hunter said that the man didn't speak, didn't smile, and didn't show anger. Yet something in his eyes had made the hunter feel as though the mountain man could see into his very soul. That story spread quickly, and soon, even those who had never ventured near the mountains were cautious. Farmers would check their fences twice. Shepherds would call out to each other when they were on the hills, and children would sleep with the doors of their homes tightly closed. But it wasn't just fear that surrounded the mountain man. There was also fascination. Every villager, from the oldest elder to the youngest child, wondered what his life was like. Did he have memories of a family? Did he remember the village he had left behind? Did he feel loneliness? Or had he found peace among the trees and cliffs? These questions were never answered, but they lingered in the minds of people as they went about their daily lives. Some villagers, especially the children, imagined him as a hero, someone stronger and braver than anyone else, capable of surviving anything. Others imagined him as a monster, dangerous and unforgiving, a warning of what could happen if someone rejected society entirely. The village itself seemed to exist in two worlds, one of ordinary daily life, and one dominated by the shadow of the mountain man. The markets, the fields, and the workshops were full of ordinary concerns: food, work, family, but there was always that undercurrent of fear. Even in bright daylight, villagers would glance toward the mountains, just in case the mountain man decided to appear. Nightfall made the fear even more intense. When the wind blew through the trees, carrying whispers and groans, people would draw their children close, and storytellers would recount the strange and terrifying legends of the man in the cage. Yet, despite all this fear, the mountain man remained largely a mystery. No one could say for sure what he ate, how he spent his days, or even if he slept. Some villagers left gifts of food near the bottom of the mountain, hoping to appease him or perhaps out of respect, but these offerings were rare and cautious. Few dared approach, and those who did were careful to make no sudden movements and speak no words. The mountain man, in return, remained distant, watching silently, rarely acknowledging anyone. What made him most terrifying, however, was not just his strength or his isolation, but the sense that he existed completely outside the normal rules of life. The villagers' laws, their social codes, and their sense of safety seemed meaningless near him. He was a force of nature, as unpredictable as the storms that swept the mountains in winter. One wrong step, one misjudged movement, and a person could disappear from the paths forever. Children told each other that the mountain man could leap from one rock to another, as if he were flying. Farmers whispered that he could catch a wild goat with his bare hands and climb back down without making a sound. Even grown men admitted in private that there was something almost magical about his abilities. The combination of fear, mystery, and impossible skill made him a legend even while he remained very real. As the seasons changed, the mountain man's presence continued to shape village life. In spring, when flowers bloomed and rivers swelled with melted snow, people still avoided the mountain paths. In summer, when the forest was thick and full of life, they feared encountering him unexpectedly. In autumn, when the leaves fell and the air turned crisp, stories of him returning from the wilderness spread like wildfire. And in winter, when snow covered the mountains and the village felt isolated, the mountain man's shadow seemed larger, stretching across the valley like a warning. The villagers lived in a careful balance, knowing that their lives were their own, yet aware of a man who lived entirely outside their understanding. The mountain man in the cage was not just a person. He was a presence, a force that commanded attention, fear, and fascination in equal measure. And while everyone spoke of him in whispers, none could deny that he had become an inseparable part of the mountains, a figure both terrifying and unforgettable. No one knew what the future would bring. Would the mountain man always remain a distant, feared figure? Or would someone ever bridge the gap between his lonely world and the village below? For now, he remained the mountain man in the cage, a living legend, a shadow on the mountainside, and a story told in hushed voices around every village hearth. The village continued its quiet, careful life under the watchful shadow of the mountains. People went about their daily routines, tending their fields, looking after animals, and caring for their families. Yet, no matter how busy or peaceful the days seemed, the stories of the mountain man in the cage never left their minds. Children whispered about him while playing, and adults often glanced toward the mountains, uneasy in the thought that something so mysterious and powerful lived just above them. Among the villagers lived a widow named Amina. She was known throughout the village for her kindness, courage, and an unusual sense of curiosity. Though she had lost her husband many years ago, she had not lost her spirit. She raised her children alone, worked tirelessly in her home and garden, and always helped her neighbors when they were in need. Unlike most villagers, she refused to live in constant fear of the mountain man. She had heard all the stories, yes, but she also knew that fear alone could never guide her life. One early morning, as the mist hung low over the village and dew clung to the fields, Amina noticed something strange. On the path leading to the mountains, she saw tiny footprints that were larger than a child's but smaller than an adult's. They seemed fresh, pressed into the soft earth, as if someone or something had walked there only hours before. She knelt down and examined the tracks carefully. Unlike the tracks of the villagers or the animals she knew, these were unusual, uneven, and slightly clawed at the toes. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with curiosity. She wondered if they belonged to the mountain man. Over the next few days, Amina kept an eye on the mountain paths. she noticed more signs. Broken branches, flattened grass, and small piles of rocks stacked carefully, almost like someone was marking a path or leaving messages. Villagers avoided the area entirely, calling it dangerous. But Amina could not ignore the strange patterns. There was something human in the tracks and the care in the arrangement of the rocks. Someone or something was living here, watching, and perhaps needing help. The villagers, of course, noticed her interest. They warned her repeatedly. "Don't go near him, Amina," they said. "The mountain man is not like us. He is dangerous. He does not like people." Even the village elders, who were usually patient and gentle, spoke with urgency. "Stay away," they said, "or you may never return." But Amina was not deterred. She knew fear often made people see danger where there might be none, and something deep inside her told her that the mountain man was not simply a threat. He was alone, misunderstood, and perhaps in need of compassion. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the forest's edge, Amina saw him for the first time clearly, without any hiding. She froze, holding her breath, as a tall, broad figure emerged from the shadows between the trees. His hair was long and unkempt, his clothes made from animal hides and patches of fabric, and his eyes were sharp and bright, scanning the forest as if he were searching for something. He moved with the strength and precision of someone who had spent his entire life in the mountains. Every step was deliberate, every motion controlled. Yet, he did not notice her immediately. Amina's heart pounded, but she did not run. She simply stood still, watching him. There was something sad in his posture, a weight in the way he moved that the villagers never spoke about. He was not merely a fierce, untouchable figure. He was lonely. She could see the isolation in the lines of his face, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking. She felt a strange connection, an urge to reach out, even though she knew it might be dangerous. Over the next week, Amina returned to the mountain path several times. She did not approach the cage directly. Instead, she left small offerings near the base of the path: fruit, fresh bread, and herbs from her garden. She did this quietly, without disturbing the surrounding area, hoping that the mountain man would notice her kindness. At first, nothing happened. The offerings remained untouched. But slowly, she began to see signs that he had discovered them. One morning, the bread she had left was gone. On another day, a pile of rocks she had arranged carefully had been moved, replaced with small branches in a pattern she did not recognize. The villagers began to notice her unusual behavior and whispered about it behind her back. "She is going to provoke him," they said. "She is tempting fate." Some warned that she would disappear, like others who had dared to enter his territory. But Amina paid no attention to the gossip. She believed that fear alone should not rule life, and she trusted that kindness could reach places fear never could. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Amina took a deep breath and decided to climb higher than she had ever dared. The path was steep, slippery, and covered with fallen leaves. Her heart beat quickly, but she moved carefully, keeping her eyes on the rocks and roots beneath her feet. As she climbed, she noticed how the forest changed. The trees grew taller and denser, the air cooler and quieter. The normal sounds of the village faded away, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and distant calls of mountain birds. It was a world apart, wild and untamed, yet strangely alive with beauty. Finally, she reached a small clearing near the mountain man's cage. From here, she could see it clearly. The structure was more imposing than she had imagined. It was not just a cage, it was a fortress, built with care and knowledge of the mountain. The beams were strong, the bars thick, and the whole structure seemed to blend with the rocks and trees. And there he was, standing just inside the cage. He noticed her presence immediately and stared with piercing eyes that seemed to see everything. Amina held her gaze, her hands clasped together calmly. She was not afraid. She wanted him to know she meant no harm. The mountain man did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, He approached the edge of the cage, inspecting her cautiously. He made no sound, spoke no words, but the intensity of his eyes was enough to make her heart race. She offered a gentle nod, a silent greeting, and waited. The air was thick with tension, but she remained still, letting her presence speak for her. That evening, she returned home, but her mind remained on the mountain man. She could not stop thinking about the sadness she had glimpsed in him, about the loneliness that seemed to weigh on him as heavily as the mountains themselves. She realized that fear had kept everyone away from him, but curiosity and compassion were what might truly reach him. Over the following days, Amina continued her visits. She left small, thoughtful gifts, often sitting quietly nearby, hoping he would notice her. Sometimes he did. Sometimes he did not. But slowly, the patterns became clear. The mountain man had begun to observe her, to watch her without hostility, and perhaps to wonder why this widow from the village was not afraid. Word of her courage began to spread. Some villagers were worried, but others began to admire her bravery. They saw that she was different from the rest. They saw that she approached life with understanding and courage rather than fear. Children would peek from behind doors to watch her climb the mountain paths, and even the elders began to admit that her actions might reveal truths about the mountain man that no one had dared to discover before. Then, one evening, a significant moment occurred. Amina left her home with a small, simple basket of gifts, but also with something personal, her late husband's wedding ring. It was a symbol of love, trust, and commitment. She carried it carefully, hoping to offer it to him as a gesture, a bridge between his isolation and her courage. She did not know how he would respond, but she trusted that gestures of kindness could reach even the most guarded hearts. The mountain man noticed her approach that evening. He stepped out of the cage and watched silently as she placed the basket and the ring carefully near the entrance. For a long time, he did not move. Then, finally, he stepped closer, lifting his large hand and examining the small, shining ring. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke volumes. Amina stood quietly, letting the moment unfold. It was the first time anyone had dared to meet him, not with fear, but with courage and respect. The villagers who watched from below were stunned. They had never seen anyone approach him like this. The widow's bravery, her compassion, and her gentle persistence were beginning to break down the walls that had kept him isolated for so long. For the first time in decades, it seemed possible that the mountain man might see kindness where he had only seen fear, and that perhaps a connection could form between him and the world he had left behind. And so, the widow's journey had begun. She had stepped into a world of fear and mystery, armed with nothing but courage and the simple, powerful tools of kindness and empathy. The mountain man in the cage, once a figure of terror and legend, was now facing the first true attempt at understanding, offered by a widow who refused to be afraid. Days passed since Amina had first left her gifts near the mountain man's cage. Every morning, she rose with determination, ready to face the long climb up the mountain once again. She carried no weapons, no shield, only a small basket of fruits, bread, and herbs, and most importantly, the symbol of her past life, her late husband's wedding ring. To anyone in the village, it seemed reckless. But Amina had learned that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act despite it. The mountain man had noticed her. He watched her movements from the shadows of the cage, hidden among the beams and rocks. He had seen many villagers approach him over the years, some out of curiosity, some out of arrogance, and some out of fear. Most had fled at the first sign of his presence. But Amina was different. She moved calmly, deliberately, and never looked at him with fear. She did not scream. She did not wave. She did not shout for attention. She simply existed, offering small gifts and quiet gestures of goodwill. For the mountain man, this was unusual. He had grown accustomed to solitude, to the silence of the mountains, and to the rhythm of a life that required constant vigilance. Encounters with humans had always been brief and tense, leaving him wary and distant. But something about Amina unsettled him in a strange way. He felt curiosity for the first time in decades, a flicker of emotion that he had long thought extinguished. He began to wonder about her courage, about why she was willing to come so close when everyone else avoided him. One afternoon, as the sun began to lower behind the peaks, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red, Amina climbed the narrow, winding path toward the cage. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and the crisp chill of the approaching evening. She moved carefully over loose rocks and tangled roots, each step deliberate, but her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. As she reached the clearing, she paused to catch her breath and look up at the cage. The mountain man was there, standing just inside the entrance, his tall, broad figure silhouetted against the fading light. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence was heavy, filled only by the whispering wind and the distant call of a bird. Then, slowly, Amina placed the basket of gifts on the ground and knelt down, setting her wedding ring gently on top. It gleamed in the sun, a small circle of metal that carried with it a lifetime of love, trust, and devotion. The mountain man stepped forward, his massive form moving with a fluid grace that belied his size. He reached out and lifted the ring with large, careful hands. His fingers were calloused and strong, yet there was gentleness in the way he held it. He turned it over, examining it from every angle. Amina remained kneeling, silent and calm, watching him with unwavering eyes. She did not speak, did not gesture. She simply let him observe, letting the weight of her gesture speak for itself. For the mountain man, the moment was unlike anything he had experienced before. He had lived for years without companionship, without trust, without kindness. The ring, small and simple, carried a message that no words could convey. That someone believed in him, that someone saw him as more than a fearsome figure or a legend. For decades, he had built walls around himself, walls of isolation and suspicion. But now, for the first time, he felt those walls begin to tremble. He lowered the ring and looked directly at Amina. In his eyes, there was caution, yes, but also a flicker of something new: recognition. Not recognition of her as a threat, but recognition of her as a person. Someone who had courage enough to approach him with honesty and compassion. Slowly, he took a seat near the entrance of the cage, keeping his eyes on her, as if trying to understand what she was offering him. Amina, sensing the shift, took a careful step forward. She spoke softly, her voice gentle, carrying no threat. "I know you are afraid," she said, "but I am not here to harm you. I am here to show you that not everyone fears you." The mountain man did not respond, but he did not move away either. He simply watched, listening to her words in silence. His sharp eyes softened slightly, the tension in his broad shoulders easing just a fraction. Over the next few days, a silent routine began to form. Amina would climb the mountain, carrying her small basket and the ring. She would place them near the cage and speak quietly to him, sharing stories of the village, of her children, of the simple beauty in daily life. Sometimes, he would watch her from a distance, hidden in the shadows. Sometimes, he would step closer, letting her presence sink in, and sometimes, he would touch the gifts she left, inspecting them as if learning what it meant to trust someone again. The villagers watched these developments with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some shook their heads, warning that she was risking her life. Others began to hope that perhaps the mountain man was not as fearsome as the stories suggested, that he could be reached through patience and kindness. Even the children, who had once run in fear at the mention of his name, began to look at the mountains with curiosity rather than terror. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of deep purple and gold, a sudden storm swept across the mountains. The wind howled, and rain fell in heavy sheets. Trees bent under the force of the gusts, and the path to the cage became slippery and dangerous. Amina, determined as always, continued her climb, holding tightly to her basket and the ring. She knew the storm could be dangerous, but she also knew that the mountain man might need her help, or at the very least, her presence. As she reached the clearing, she saw him struggling to secure the cage against the wind and rain. His movements were precise, but the storm made the task difficult. Without hesitation, she called out to him, offering help. At first, he tensed, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to strike. But when he saw the concern in her eyes, the genuine desire to assist, he hesitated and allowed her to step closer. Together, they adjusted the structure, securing the beams and bars. The mountain man worked silently, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He no longer saw her as an intruder. After the storm passed, the sky cleared, revealing the first stars of the evening. The mountain man finally spoke, his voice low and rough, yet calm. "You are not afraid," he said. Amina smiled softly. "No," she replied. "I believe there is more to you than what others see. I believe in the goodness you hide inside." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, a small smile curved on his lips, a faint, almost imperceptible sign of trust. From that night onward, the bond between them grew stronger. The mountain man began to emerge from the shadows of the cage more often, watching Amina with quiet curiosity, and sometimes even joining her as she placed gifts or spoke to him. He began to share small gestures of his own, moving rocks to create paths, leaving firewood neatly stacked, and occasionally leaving small tokens of thanks for Amina. Each action was subtle, but it spoke volumes. The turning point came one morning when Amina arrived at the clearing and found the ring placed carefully in her basket, surrounded by wildflowers arranged in a delicate pattern. It was a message without words, a sign that the mountain man had accepted her gesture, that he trusted her, and that he was ready to bridge the gap between his isolated world and hers. Amina felt a surge of hope and joy. She realized that the mountain man was not merely a figure of fear, but a person capable of connection, capable of change, and capable of forming bonds, if approached with patience and understanding. This was the moment when the mountain man began to transform, not through force or intimidation, but through the simple power of kindness and courage. Amina's persistent efforts, her fearless approach, and her symbolic offering had begun to break through decades of fear, isolation, and misunderstanding. The villagers, who had once trembled at the thought of him, now began to see a different side. A man who was still strong and wild, yet capable of trust and even gentle gestures. In the days that followed, the mountain man started to emerge from his cage more freely. He allowed Amina to come closer, even letting her place gifts inside the cage itself. He began to speak in short, cautious words, sharing fragments of his past, memories of life before the mountains, and thoughts that had long been buried. Each conversation was a small step toward understanding, a bridge being built slowly but steadily over the chasm of fear that had separated him from the world. By the time the villagers noticed the change, the mountain man was no longer just a legend of fear. He was becoming a living example of courage, compassion, and transformation. And it had all begun with the bold gesture of a widow who refused to let fear dictate her actions, who believed in the power of kindness, and who trusted that even the most guarded heart could be reached with patience and love. The days after the mountain man's first sign of trust were unlike anything the village had ever seen. Amina continued her visits to the mountains, her courage unwavering, her heart full of hope. The mountain man, once a figure of fear and legend, began to show small but meaningful changes. He was no longer just a shadow on the mountainside. He was slowly becoming a presence that could interact, even gently, with the world below. At first, the villagers were skeptical. Mothers warned their children to stay indoors. Elders shook their heads in disbelief, and even the bravest hunters watched from a distance with caution. "It is too risky," they whispered. "He is still wild, still dangerous." Yet, as days turned into weeks, they began to notice subtle shifts. The mountain man was no longer hiding entirely. He would sometimes be seen repairing the paths near his cage, arranging wood neatly, or leaving small signs of life in the forest. The once eerie and forbidding place now carried hints of order, as if someone had begun to care for it beyond mere survival. Amina herself had grown more confident with each visit. She no longer approached timidly or with hesitation. She spoke to him calmly, laughed softly when he mimicked her actions, and shared stories of the village and its people. She told him about her children, about the seasons, about the festivals and traditions that brought joy to their small lives. Her words were simple, yet they carried warmth, care, and a bridge between two very different worlds. The mountain man, for his part, listened. He rarely spoke, but his eyes followed her every movement. Slowly, he began to respond, not with words, but with gestures, a nod, a careful smile, a hand extended to accept the food she brought, or the small gifts that carried meaning. The turning point came during one crisp autumn morning. Amina climbed the familiar path to the clearing, the golden leaves crunching beneath her feet. She carried her basket. But this time, it was lighter. The mountain man was already there, sitting near the entrance to his cage. His massive frame relaxed in a way that was almost impossible to imagine weeks ago. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Curiosity mixed with recognition, trust mixed with a hint of gratitude. Amina knelt and placed her basket down. She smiled softly. "I brought you some bread and fruit," she said. "And something else." She held out her hand. Revealing her wedding ring once again, the mountain man stared at it. He lifted it carefully, examining it as if understanding its meaning more deeply each time he saw it. Then, slowly, he placed the ring into her hand, a silent acknowledgement that he trusted her completely. In that moment, the distance between them disappeared. Years of fear, isolation, and misunderstanding melted away, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. Word of the mountain man's change spread through the village, though cautiously at first. People began to notice small signs. Smoke rising from the clearing near the cage, the sound of chopping wood, and occasionally, the distant figure of the mountain man moving carefully along the mountain paths, no longer hiding entirely. Children who once trembled at the mention of his name began to watch from afar, curious rather than afraid. Hunters who had avoided the paths now dared to venture slightly closer, though always with caution. Slowly, the village began to see him not as a monster or a threat, but as a man strange, perhaps, but human, capable of change, capable of trust. One morning, Amina decided to do something extraordinary. She invited the mountain man to come closer to the village. At first, he hesitated, stepping back into the safety of the cage, but her calm, unwavering presence encouraged him. Day by day, she led him down the paths, showing him the small, everyday wonders of village life, the marketplace with its colors and sounds, the laughter of children at play, the smell of freshly baked bread. At every step, she reassured him. Never forcing, never rushing, allowing him to experience the world at his own pace. The villagers were astonished. They had spent years in fear. Yet here was a man they had once considered untouchable, walking freely among them, guided by a widow's courage and patience. They watched as he helped with small tasks, carrying firewood, helping repair fences, guiding lost animals back to their pens. His presence, once terrifying, became reassuring. People began to understand that he had always been capable of kindness and care. He had simply never been given the chance to show it. Amina's actions had done more than just reach the mountain man. They had transformed the entire village. Fear no longer ruled their thoughts. Children played near the mountain paths without terror. Elders spoke of him without dread. And families felt a newfound connection to the wilderness around them. The mountain man, in turn, began to form bonds with the villagers. He shared stories of the mountains, taught the hunters about the hidden paths and safe trails, and offered guidance during storms or times of scarcity. His strength, once feared, became a gift to the community. The widow and the mountain man shared a special bond. It was not built on words alone, but on trust, understanding, and shared experience. She had approached him with courage, offering kindness where others had only offered fear. He had responded not with immediate warmth, but with careful observation, slow acceptance, and finally, genuine connection. Their relationship became a symbol of hope, proof that even the most guarded hearts could change when met with empathy. As the seasons passed, the mountain man grew more integrated into village life. He no longer lived solely in the cage on the mountain. While he still valued his solitude and the comfort of the mountains, he began to visit the village regularly. He helped during harvests, assisted in repairing homes, and even participated in village celebrations. People learned to speak with him, to laugh with him, and to value his presence, rather than fear it. His life, once defined by isolation, was now enriched by friendship, trust, and purpose. The wedding ring, once a simple token of a lost love, had become a powerful symbol of transformation. It represented courage, connection, and the belief that even the most lonely and misunderstood people could be reached through patience and care. Amina wore it still. But now it also represented a bridge between fear and understanding, isolation and community, legend and reality. The village, too, had learned an invaluable lesson. They realized that fear could cloud judgment, that stories and rumors could create shadows larger than the truth, and that courage and kindness had the power to heal even the deepest divides. The mountain man had always been part of their world, yet they had only seen him as a figure of terror. Through Amina's brave actions, they saw him as he truly was, a man, strong and wise, capable of change, and deserving of trust. Over time, the mountain man became a living legend of a different kind. Children no longer whispered in fear. They told stories of his strength, courage, and kindness. Hunters shared lessons learned from him. Elders spoke of the transformation with pride, pointing to the widow and the mountain man as examples of what could be achieved when fear was replaced with empathy. And for Amina, the journey was deeply personal. She had not only changed a man's life but had also reshaped the heart of an entire community, proving that courage, patience, and kindness were stronger than any legend of fear. In the end, the mountain man was no longer feared. He was respected, valued, and understood. His cage, once a symbol of isolation, had become a place where trust was built, where human connection blossomed despite years of distance. And Amina, the widow who had dared to approach him with nothing but courage and a wedding ring, became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest mountains, light could be found, and even the most feared souls could be reached through compassion. The village thrived with this newfound understanding. The mountain man walked among them freely, helping where he could, observing the world with careful attention, yet always carrying the lessons of his past. He had become part of the community without losing himself, blending his strength and solitude with friendship and trust. And as people told his story for generations, they did not speak of fear anymore. They spoke of courage, transformation, and the power of a single act of kindness to change everything. Thus, the mountain man, once feared by everyone, and the widow who boldly offered her wedding ring, became a legend not of terror, but of hope. Their story lived on in the hearts of the villagers, a tale of bravery, trust, and the remarkable power of human connection. It was proof that even the loneliest and most mysterious among us could find friendship and understanding, if only someone had the courage to reach out.